Coming off the heels of the first successful 2 years of TF2's life, 2009 was the year the look of the modern day game was beginning to show through. One of the 5 current core game modes, King of the Hill, was introduced thanks to the first original Koth map, Viaduct. Harvest came out of nowhere and brought with it the first Halloween event for many years to come, and has tortured the people who despise Halloween maps since. Then arguably the reason for TF2's success, cosmetics, were added in the summer of that year. And the reason for today's video, 14 brand new maps were added to the game. So without further ado, Egypt is a prime example of map that I think is criminally overlooked in the grand scheme of TF2 as a whole. It's easy to take for granted all the things it introduced that a lot of maps since then have been doing for a while now. Even though it still falls under the category of desert, the location is very far removed from the pre-established lore of the original maps, having the honor of being the first official map in the game to take place outside of its North American setting to the beautiful continent of Africa. Unless Manco actually built pyramids in the middle of the Badlands Desert, I've always considered this map to take place in actual Egypt. Even the original game banana page supports this. Although if you look closely at the hieroglyph textures you'll begin to notice some familiar things, so who knows. That's another thing this map exceeds at. Egypt was one of the first community maps to go all out and create an entire new array of props and textures for just this one setting, to really engross you in that ancient Egyptian atmosphere, and it pulls it off perfectly in my opinion. Although the strange thing is that this is one of the few asset packs that doesn't use the TF keyword when searching for them in the Hammer Editor's material search tab. Just type Egypt in the filter and you'll find them. The last detail I want to gush about is that this is one of the first maps to sort of have an in-universe backstory to it. Like other maps beforehand usually have a purpose to them as a base for their respective team. For example, Dust Bowl is a missile silo for a team, or well is both a source of water, but the train depot itself has huge strategic value for this fictional war. In Egypt's case however, there's an actual laid out explanation as to why Blue is attacking the red team this time. On the game banana page like from earlier, it explains that Red found these ancient ruins with a treasure inside, and Blue just wants to steal it. Which you actually do see this treasure inside the tomb that opens up if Blue wins the round. Even without that description page you could probably put 2 and 2 together just using environmental details, which is how most maps tell their stories, even if they are not the most in-depth of things. Now before we move on, I don't really have a lot to talk about the map gameplay wise, but I wanted to bring attention to these 2 things anyway. For one, the map is a lot more vertical in some places than previous maps, which I find interesting. I can't really think of a map that's super vertical besides maybe Granary Mid. And 2, I absolutely despise this single doorway in the first stage of the map. Anytime you pop your head out you're always welcome to the sight of 4 snipers who waited weeks just to shoot somebody, 3 soldiers or demos ready to produce more spam than your email account, and an entire nest of engineers that just appeared somehow. I don't know how they got there, but they did, and it's really confusing. There is no one true way to describe the uniqueness of Junction, but the only way that I see fitting for this map is by SCP article.
SCP-4069. Object Class Euclid. SCP-4069 is a small office facility situated underground that is roughly 7.4618 kilo hammer units squared in playable space. The origin of the facility is unknown, but many researchers assume it was the base of a rival faction to another group dating back to the 1970s. Once personnel enter and acknowledge its existence, extreme trauma is induced slowly to the head and dies due to the cramped spaces, and one of the worst last points to capture in the history of TF2. As soon as personnel exit the facility, however, all memory of its existence is wiped from the occupant's mind. This effect doesn't seem to work on electronic memory of any kind, however, leading to how we know of this SCP at all. It is wise to avoid this facility at all costs.
Junction is a very unpopular map, and it's not hard to see why. In my line of experience, there's two things almost every player despises about map design. That being low ceilings and minimal movement space. Junction just so happens to have both of those, on top of some really tight corners that are not fun in the slightest to fight around. Like, think back to Dust Bowl. Before you reach the rocket at the end, there's this one side room used as a flank. It's like they tried to take this one area and turn it into a full-blown map. No space to jump, narrow hallways, and one of the best contenders for the smallest doorway in the game award. But unlike that excuse for a playable space, this map is just a delight to look at. I mentioned it last episode, but I love the office workspace aesthetic for this game. In my opinion, this is easily one of the best looking maps for early TF2. There's so much unnecessary detail, which is the best kind of detail, and I love it for that reason. The downside, however, is that every area looks the same. And even though this is one of the smallest maps in the game, because of how similar it looks, you can easily get lost in places. At least in my experience. Junction is by no means the worst map in TF2, there are far worse ones. But I wouldn't be lying if I said I only play this map just for the aesthetic alone. Even though the arena game mode has been dead for quite a while, Watchtower as a map is still super iconic in today's world when compared to other arena maps. The map is just the embodiment of community server to me. The layout is so all over the place. The pipelines used to connect the watchtower itself make no sense. The tower itself is constructed in the ugliest way possible, it'll never leave my brain. Even the sun doesn't line up with the shadows on the map. And I love this map for all those reasons. Although they did do my son dirty and just left him to die in the collapsed mine in Spawn. Actually, this is the only other map that prop appears on now that I think about it. Regardless, I've never actually played this map like the way it was intended on normal arena. All my experience was on Saxton Hale servers. And to give you some foresight into a community server's perspective, people arguing whether or not Watchtower is good is about as bad as talking about modern day politics.
Six and a half hours later.
While we're waiting, why don't we skip to the next map and check up on Pipeline later? In a game like TF2, having your maps both memorable and easily recognizable, even from just a glance, is very important to me. I don't really see the incentive of playing a game where every map looks the same. And TF2 is one of the best examples of having a diverse map pool in gaming. Every map is its own unique experience filled with life, memorable set pieces, and will stand the test of time as some of the most fun playable spaces you can have in an online game. Except these two. Last video I said I wanted to wait until this episode to talk about both Gold Rush and Hoodoo by comparing the two maps. And it's that very reason this video took so long to come out. I have been trying to come up with a good script where I compare and contrast these two maps for months. And I just give up. What I could say for Gold Rush would also apply to Hoodoo in some manner and vice versa, because they are just that similar. A good analogy I could make is that Gold Rush is the Mario Party 9 of TF2 maps. I swear I'm going somewhere with this. They're both disgustingly slow, not fun to play, and everyone who is playing is miserable all the time. Hoodoo on the other hand would be Mario Party 10, because it has all the flaws of the original that no one bothered to try to fix. And I guess it looks slightly prettier. We'll get to it later, but I think I'd rather play Cactus Canyon before playing the other two maps, and this map doesn't even exist anymore. Even though it's more unfinished than a Bethesda game, the much more interesting map layout plus the fact it's only 2 stages instead of 3 makes it much easier to digest in my opinion. Back on topic, I don't think I'd prefer playing Hoodoo or Gold Rush if given the choice. They're pretty equal in terms of quality in my opinion. But to be fair to each map I should at least list some background details I like. Although Nucleus and the map after this, Sawmill, are known more as Koth maps, they were actually added to the game as arena maps first. So I figured I should talk about them now, before tackling the first real Koth map, Viaduct. With that being said, Nucleus is This is a map I respect more than I actually like to play, and that mostly has to do with its peculiar design. Nucleus is very unique with its control point placement, because it's housed in the very center of everything. Meanwhile the rest of the map revolves on an outer ring, connected by 4 bridges. Now the way they turned this crusher-like shape into a playable map just makes the mapping side of my brain kick into overflow. Because here's why. Sourcehammer, the editing program mappers use to create stuff with, doesn't really like world geometry with multiple angles. And it's because of this reason I'm kind of amazed Nucleus was even made. The way it gets around this limitation is by utilizing what are known as funk details and displacements. Funk details, if I had to explain them, are ways to optimize really complicated brushwork that isn't necessary for optimization. Like a table or a shelf made out of brushes would be something you'd funk detail. You can funk detail walls as shown with Nucleus, just don't ever do it to walls mandatory for optimizing your map. Displacements on the other hand are what you normally use to make terrain with, but if used right, they can have clever uses elsewhere like on these ramps or the light beam that rims the outer ring of the map. I'm bringing up all these construction methods because that's what I respect about Nucleus. When I mentioned clever techniques in map design back in episode 1, this is the kind of thing I was talking about. But I also said I respect Nucleus more than I like to play it. And that's because the only way to actually play this map and casual at the moment is via Koth. And Koth on this map is about as fun as stepping on a toothpick. It's very clear this map was made for arena mode first, and they just sort of slapped Koth onto it later. No other map in the game is constructed in this circular manner, besides Monster Bash, which would get added years later. And that's for a good reason. This map is really freaking cramped when you're anywhere else besides the center. And in sheer contrast, the entire center of the map is one giant sideline. You feel so exposed when you're in the middle. You don't really have a good exit strategy either, considering how long the bridges are. See, this design works for Monster Bash because its game mode is player destruction. And really any map design layout more or less works for that game mode. However, in KOTH this design doesn't work all that well in my opinion. Most of the core game modes revolve around a thing called a front line, which is the dividing line between the two teams, where they fight/interact. And the idea for each team is to push the front line as far back as necessary in order to gain the area that's around the point of interest. Maps for the core game modes are built semi-linear to keep this front line in mind. And because Nucleus was made for arena mode, a game mode where the maps are more open to begin with, and the main objective isn't to capture the point, but rather just eliminate everyone on the other team. It feels very jarring to put the KOTH game mode on a map that was originally made for something else. Now that's not to say every map has to follow every traditional design point. That would be boring and would limit creativity. But just to summarize this long talking point, Nucleus is extremely I could go on and list other problems I have with this map, but they more so have to do with issues I have with KOTH maps as a whole. So in the meantime, let's see how Pipeline is doing. It's been a while, hopefully we found a match. God damn it. As mentioned before, Sawmill and Nucleus were added first as arena maps and later converted to KOTH. And Sawmill, at least to me, easily converts better as a KOTH map than Nucleus. This is just speculation on my part, but I think with Sawmill they had meticulously thought ahead of what other game modes would work well with this map. Unlike with Nucleus, where they just did it so they could have more maps for the brand new Gamma mode that was about to release. I don't really have any proof other than the fact the CTF version of this map came out very shortly after the KOTH version. Sawmill itself is just a really solid map that's hard to hate. Although, this is going to sound like a weird complaint. I've never been a fan of the rainy mud aesthetic in TF2 this map and Thunder Mountain have. Like it looks so good it makes me squirm at just the thought of walking/falling in the mud itself. But aside from that, everything else about this map is excellent. We've got one of the few asymmetrical map layouts. Normally mappers just make one side first, copy and paste, mirror or rotate by 180 degrees, then connect it back. But nope, the flank routes are entirely different. One being the debut of the always beautiful waterfall prop, and the other being this swampy wood platform where the cut wood is stored. Now I'm sure this design means Sawmill has a stupid tier list on which side is better. But in the grand scheme of things it's mostly only these flank routes that are different along with the structure right before the main building. I know mappers do this to keep things balanced, but I wish we got to see more stuff like this. And last but not least, this map introduced everyone's favorite stage hazard. I'm gonna admit something that's gonna upset some people, so bear with me. I don't like KOTH. KOTH to me is the most unfun game mode from a personal perspective. Because there's only one point to capture, that means maps are small in size to compensate, and I'm not the biggest fan of tiny map sizes. Not saying I dislike all small maps, but there are just certain ones later on I personally do not enjoy playing on. To talk about the map that's on your screen finally, Viaduct is at least a good example of a KOTH map done right in my opinion. The layout has multiple ways to traverse the map, each with their own strengths/weaknesses. The distance between spawn to the point isn't too long, and not one class is blatantly overpowered.
Apples.
Although it does fall into the trap of most smaller sized maps, where it's a bit too easy to spawn camp the other team. Which is a problem I have with most KOTH maps. But like I mentioned before, it's still a good example of a KOTH map done right. One other thing. I just want to bring attention to all the new wonderful snow assets this map introduced for mappers to use. This is gonna sound weird, but I always loved it when official new maps would get added, just to see what all the new props and textures are. It's probably the reason I like Mercenary Park so much, but we won't be getting to that map for, oh boy, A very long time. Before we move on, there's a small detail I don't see many people talking about. Around the capture point is this underground tunnel leading to some kind of bunker. Now whatever is in that bunker is anyone's guess, but the implication here on Viaduct is that whatever is in that bunker is important enough that the two teams are fighting over it. Not every COF map does this, but usually something of importance will be near the capture point, and whatever it is the reason for the teams fighting. Lazarus is probably the most obvious example, with the giant doors opening to reveal the long-lost Lazarus Pit of Legend upon winning the round. But a more subtle one would be in Sawmill. That capture point is also an elevator leading somewhere underground. I've said this before, but I just love super minor stuff like this, because they not only make the map more charming, but they also give an implied history to these maps. I could list more examples, but again, we won't be getting to those maps for a long time. Now to be honest, I don't really have a lot of experience with this map. Mostly because, you know. And my realm of community servers don't use this map. I mean, you might see it on some VSH servers, but it's not ideal for the game mode due to its cramped layout and lack of health kits. Side note, why in the hell does this map have 4 ammo locations, but only 1 health kit? I get the point of arena modies, to not be alive for long, but 1 is just ridiculous. Back on topic, while I've played this map very little, I probably recognize it more from old TF2 videos like that 1-star video of him playing the hidden game mode and the beginning of the 100 ways to die in TF2 SFM, which I guess just goes to show how, even though the arena mode is dead, the maps are still pretty recognizable by today, and that's all I can really say. Again, arena map segments will be very short, and I can only point out small details / how good the map looks for so long, until it gets boring. Gonna do it anyway, but that's besides the point. Which is a shame, because I would like the background music to play longer. But we can just move on to No one remembers this map. I can guarantee that the average TF2 player has at least played this map once or twice, and as soon as they leave they're already thinking of something else, and don't remember a thing about Yukon. It's like Junction in a way. No one remembers it until they actually play the map, and then all the memories come rushing back. The difference between Yukon and Junction, however, is that Junction will give you brain tumors. Yukon on the other hand is actually a pretty solid map on its own. The location and aesthetic is one of the most unique settings in TF2. This weird combo of a national park mixed with a sawmill is a pretty nice looking setting that only recently at the time of this video has come back in anyway. But aside from that, it's a standard 5CP map. My only real negatives with the map is the actual layout is kind of bland, and the final point is a bit too close in my opinion to the spawn doors for the enemy team. You know, just a smidge. Yukon is like the definition of map from a bygone age. Not a lot of people remember it, but those who do acknowledge its worth. Which is a shame, because a lot of maps in the 5CP genre kind of fit into that description, as you'll no doubt see in episode 3. And I know I haven't really gone into the real meat, that is 5CP yet, but I'm saving it for a noteworthy outlier when we get to it. Because trust me, there are some things I've got to say. But let's just move on to. Oh no. I knew this day would come. We now return to gameplay footage over annoying music. Harvest is shit. Harvest is everything, and I do mean everything, I do not like about Koth. The map is way too small for my liking, which just leads to all kinds of bullshit whenever I play it. One being sniper is way too overpowered with these sightlines. A sniper can stand here, here, or here, and he basically covers the entire map. I do not understand why they thought this super long and exposed straight line to the point was a good idea, alongside this pitiful excuse for cover. And yes, you can just go through the building, but if you aren't getting killed by the resident QA spy, you still have to enter the line of sight anyway to enter the capture point. Harvest is just a bit too open / small for Koth in my opinion, and maybe it's because all my favorite classes to play aren't super mobile, but I honestly think I would enjoy this map better in arena than it does Koth. Oh, and don't get me started on how easy it is to spawn camp. In a map like Viaduct you can't reach the top of the roofs, meaning projectile classes can't camp on top of them or spam into the spawn area. But because Harvest is more open most of the time, it leads to soldiers and demos with a crits creek spamming explosives down below. And if you somehow manage to Uber a heavy or soldier in your spawn, just to tell them to piss off, they'll just hide behind the other side of the roof waiting for your Uber to run out. And as soon as their crit streak gets back to 100%. So now you have to wait in spawn until the match is over, or the enemy team gets bored and harasses someone else, and in the worst case scenario, you just leave the match. And no, I'm not saying openness is a bad thing, I'm saying there needs to be a balance of restrictions and openness for fair / fun matches. And in my opinion Harvest is not either of those two things. Then there's the spawn rooms themselves, which is just a straight line for even more bullying.
Oh, please. Oh, no.
Home run!
This is me going on a side tangent, but I hate spawn rooms that are just empty boxes. In my opinion, spawn rooms should serve two purposes: to spawn obviously, and to act as shelter for your team. In an empty box room, the exact moment you spawn there is literally nothing at all to protect you if a stray projectile were to somehow get through the door. You ever wonder why the spawn room in Upward is so big? Spam, that's the reason. And speaking of spam, that's the only thing you're ever gonna see when you try to capture the point, because that convenient hole at the top looks mighty fun to shoot stuff through. And you know, that hole is only there because if it wasn't, the point would be a claustrophobic tomb whenever you did try to capture it. And just to go on a side tangent, why the fuck can you build in here as engineer? I mean, yeah, you can easily counter it once you know it's there, but good luck trying to get past all the previous bullshit I spent the last 3 minutes bitching about to do so. So, in conclusion, map sucks dick. I don't have fun on this map. I'd much rather play any other map in the game, and the only thing I do like is the farm aesthetic, but even still a nice painting to look at is still better than a painting that gives me brain tumors. Also, Harvest event is better because Spooky Ghost is cute, don't at me.
Bruh.
Now that we are back to maps that I actually enjoy, Double Cross for a lot of people is seen as a peak of CTF. For some people, that title should go to Landfall or even Turbine. But if we are talking just an altogether solid as heck map, Double Cross knocks it out of the park in every category in my opinion. The reason I prefer this map over the others like Landfall is mostly due to the layout. The bridge is just the perfect area for the most chaotic battles that are just too much fun to pass on. I know back in Harvest I complained about it being too open, but in this map's case I don't really have an issue with its openness for some reason. These weird out of place buildings definitely help, because they block part of the obvious snipers go here spot of the map. However, this cheeky spot on the back window is pretty egregious. But aside from that, the map is just super comfortable. The nighttime aesthetic especially helps to give it this unique atmosphere, especially considering only 2 previous maps were set at night prior to Double Cross. One being Harvest Event, which you could only play during a certain time of the year, and the other we still can't find a match for. Although I'd probably be a fool to not mention the super blatant talking point when it comes to Double Cross. And it's that this map is basically just 2 fort but good. I love me some 2 fort, but if I want an actual match I'll come to Double Cross. The comparisons between the maps aren't unwarranted either. In fact, you can totally imagine Double Cross as a remake of sorts of TF2's most iconic map. They both have a large bridge connecting the 2 bases that you can cross under. Both have a sewer system of sorts. Heck, even the actual bases look eerily similar between both maps. And even if all of that wasn't intentional, both maps deserve to go down in TF2's history books for some of the best maps the game has to offer. Gorge is a weird map to end this episode because the last video ended with Steel, which is arguably one of the most complex maps in the game. So it felt sort of climatic as an end to the first episode. Which isn't to say Gorge isn't good in its own right. That's far from the truth. Gorge is like the definition of a grade A map. But it's like Steel as a final boss to an RPG. And Gorge is just a level 2 enemy. To get on topic, I for one think Gorge is a great map. However, that saying comes with a little asterisk. Gorge is a great map, sometimes. Gorge is a roller, plain and simple, which are basically maps where either you have an easy time crushing the other team, or the other team has an easy time crushing you. And the matches that are more balanced are kind of rare. But in Gorge's case, however, it's more like a roller in the first half, and in the second half it turns into everyone's favorite game, Choke Point Defense Simulator. Remember that one doorway back in Egypt? Meet its grandson. This single doorway is most of the reason the second half of Gorge is so infamous. This one area is basically no man's land in terms of how dangerous it is to even attempt to cross it because of the lack of real flank options. There's the upper area where you usually see an engineer have a nest set up, and this small room off to the side which you have to enter by crossing no man's land, or the much safer way of just dropping from here. The flanks are there, but in my opinion they are not really effective, if I'm being honest. Because of all of this, it essentially forces you to work with your team in order to brave the mighty doorway and start kicking names and taking ass. If the doorway on Egypt were the racist grandpa of choke points, then the one on Gorge is the descendant that, while not as bad, is still not someone you should be associated with because of its family's legacy. I know I've been harsh on the map, even though I said at the beginning I like it. And I do, but if there's at least one decent sniper and a level 3 sentry at the final point, you're basically going to be in choke point hell for the next couple of minutes. And this is probably the thing I dislike most about the map, and it's the length. It's too dang short. I know everyone complains that every time you play Dust Bowl you age by 20 years. But anytime you play Gorge it honestly feels like you reversed an age by how short it felt. Literally every time I tried to record the match would end in like 5 minutes, and although it helps with my computer space, I would still like to enjoy my time with the map. God, I hate being negative. Let's fix that. Probably my favorite thing about Gorge isn't even in the map itself, but the TF2 website. There's an entire blog post that goes in depth behind the development of Gorge, showing early sketch ideas for the map, and even in development screenshots of some areas. Shout out to MegapieMan PhD on Discord for letting me know about the blog post in the first place. If you're interested in this sort of thing like I am, I'd highly recommend you give it a read. I hope I'm not forgetting anything. Oh poop. To be honest with you, I don't think I've ever played an actual match of Pipeline. Mostly because A. Community servers only ever play you know what when I type in PLR_ in the search bar. B. Even when God intervenes, when I queue for it in casual, the devil somehow always finds a way to ruin it. And 3. Payload race as a game mode just isn't my cup of tea. I feel this is a similar situation to Fast Lane, where I'd probably be doing a disservice if I were to talk about this map in depth. So I won't do that. However, I do have some things to say. Even though I wasn't around when this game mode was first released, I can imagine the community was so ecstatic to be getting a new game mode at all. I think that kind of excitement is something current players deeply miss. I kind of touched on this back in Double Cross, but this being the first map to be set at night does help to give it a unique feeling and stand out from the crowd. And speaking of Double Cross, while I was recording panning shots of the map I never noticed before the industrial background behind the blue team's base. And then I thought it looked awfully like the setting a pipeline. So now it's my own headcanon that the two maps are connected to one another. I know this is a weird way to actually end the episode, but I didn't want to just forget about Pipeline altogether. It deserves as much screen time as any other map. And I just wanted to say thank you to all these wonderful maps that were introduced in 2009. Even though I might not like all of them, they still hold a special place in the community's hearts for a reason. And hopefully I showed some light on a map you didn't think much of before. So before I say anything, I just want to say thank you for watching this video. If you've managed to make it this far, I wasn't actually sure if this video series would even be a good idea or if the first video would get more than 10 views. And well, it somehow did. So again, I just want to say thank you. So to those wondering why this video took so long to come out is a complicated answer. The short version is laziness. The long version is after episode 1. I started working on a very large death run map themed around Scooby-Doo which took around 3 months to complete. After that, for about a month or 2 I was working on an experimental map that's essentially an adventure map. It's not finished at all. It was a proof of concept more than anything else, and even then it was kind of bad. Then after that I finally got my first job. I don't want to get into it, just know it's retail, and well, it's not the most fun experience. Other than that, I've just been trying to spend as much time with my online friends as possible. And I can't say this enough, but the friends that I have I wouldn't trade for anything, and the times I get to spend with them are the highlight of my day. They mean the world to me, and they somehow put up with my obnoxiousness for some reason. But enough about being sappy. Between all those events, I've been working on this video on and off since then. And it was only until around December of 2021 that I decided I should really finish this episode before I work on any other projects. Yeah, I kind of bid my own butt in the outro of the last video by saying the script was almost done, because it was not. This video went through a lot of rewrites and re-edits until it got to where I was super happy with it. So for like the 3rd time, thank you for sticking around this long and watching the video. I promise I'll try not to release episode 3 a whole year later. And I'll see you in the 3rd episode of Map Scan, where we tackle the 2010 era of maps. See you there. Go to bed.